Ladies, gentlemen, and Haradrim of all ages, we are 2.5 weeks into Season 7 for Diablo 4, and things are starting to settle down at least a little bit as far as game changes for now. And with changes to the top submitted pit leaderboards happening very infrequently at this point, I thought it would be a fun time to stop and have a look at the top 10 builds in the game by pit tier completion reported by players, and then speed as well if they're on the same tier. The criteria being that it needs to be a distinctly different build to count separately on this list. I'm not going to count two separate Inferno-based Sorcerer builds. Even though they are going to be unique in their own ways, it's still the same concept at the center of the build. That said, because we're going for top 10 overall, this means not every class will be equally represented, and in fact, not really a spoiler because you'd realize very quickly here, Spiritborn isn't even in the top 10. Their top reported pit clear is a tier 120, which puts them out of the top 10 clears from differing builds across the other classes. So that just shows how well below the rest they've been in Season 7. As well, it's worth mentioning that some of these use Decay Augmentation as a witch power to scale extra damage off of ultimate skills as a focus of the build. And while the bugged versions of Decay Augmentation builds aren't going to be counted at all for this, there was a couple days of craziness there, it does seem even with Decay Augmentation fixed and re-enabled, it no longer works for scaling ultimate skills that have witchcraft tags. So these builds still have the clears as they have, they're still impressive, there's no taking those away, and that's why we will be talking about them today, but if Decay Augmentation is involved, it will be weaker than it looks here because it has been hit pretty hard. All that said, we'll start off with the 10th strongest build, which is Lightning Spear Sorcerer, with a lot of the same engine fueling it that has made this build incredibly strong in prior seasons. Pit is arguably its weak point, as it's pretty much the most comfortable general Sorcerer build to play for all other content, everything that isn't pushing the very highest possible pit runs, and yet at a tier 123 top pit completion, it's still doing perfectly fine in pits as well. It's just not quite as broken as abusing Shatter. The main enabler of this setup then, to begin with, is a splintering energy aspect, which makes Lightning Spear crits arc to other enemies with up to 200% of your critical damage bonus as an extra scaler. This makes it just extremely powerful in general to scale crit damage in this setup, and then you just live and die by the power of this aspect and the splintering energy that it procs. Next up then, we have the Blood Spear variation to Bone Spear and Blood Wave Necromancer, using the unique pants added this season that aren't part of the truly ridiculous powerful new build, and this is the one that makes Blood Wave trap enemies in bone prisons and changes your Bone Spears to also be a blood skill and makes them also cost health to cast. Then you boost up the Bone Spears themselves as the main damage mechanism, you get super high crit chance and crit damage, you get guaranteed overpowers on enemies that are inside of the bone prisons with your Bone Spears, and a fun bonus part of this is the Dark Dance aspect. It is a secondary part of it that makes any skill that consumes life deal significantly increased damage, and even though the tooltip calls the damage additive, it's actually a pretty hefty damage multiplier, not additive. Part of the unique pants that I mentioned earlier is that it makes Bone Spear also cost life to cast, so it actually permanently accesses this bonus here. Not to mention that this also applies to the extra damage echoes you get from your Bone Spears with the Deathless Visage unique element, and currently this build has a tier 126 pit tier clear at the top, which, while significantly less than the top Necromancer build, is still extremely impressive in the grand scheme of things. Then after that, in 8th place, we have the Lacerate ultimate skill focused build for the Druid, coming in with a tier 127 pit clear. This is based on a lot of similar principles as the Cataclysm Druid that we'll be talking about later, but to put it relatively simply, in Season 7 the developers gave us some big changes for ultimate skills, and this includes rank 5 bonuses. Lacerate's rank 5 bonus makes it scale with your critical damage stat, which is pretty powerful in itself, but then you build around reducing the cooldown of the skill as much as physically possible, you scale the crit damage to the moon, and then you pair it with the Zan rune, which procs before activating Lacerate to make it do every single hit of Lacerate a guaranteed crit and overpower for the full duration, resulting not only in big meaty damage numbers of course, but during Lacerate as a skill, you are literally invulnerable. Your hitbox does not exist during its duration, you cannot take damage, so it's an incredibly safe build to use as well for that reason at the very least. Up then in 7th is the Burning Deep Freeze Sorcerer build with a tier 128 pit clear. For similar reasons as the Lacerate builds being makeable for Druid, Deep Freeze gained a rank 5 bonus, making it scale with your damage to vulnerable enemies bonus, but then it combines it with the Decay Augmentation witch power by using the Voice of the Stars occult gem to make the skill count as a witch power. Then this makes it do up to half of its damage as burning damage over time too. So the initial damage is a bunch of upfront cold damage, then the burn gets applied from Decay Augmentation, then you can combo that with Greater Fireball, reapplying a portion of the damage dealt over time, Fireball enchant, triggering free fireballs when enemies die as well, and then the Shatter key passive, making enemies explode after they become unfrozen for a portion of the damage they took while frozen. And of course they'll be freezing constantly, as the main active skill in this build is Deep Freeze itself. It's also also worth noting that, like Lacerate Druid 2, you are immune while the skill is casting, so aside from the fact that you have to basically pile enemies together and then you get locked in place while you are casting it, it is actually pretty comfortable too. And it's really neat to see how many Sorcerer builds are actually managing to sneak into this list, even if this one did accomplish it with the classic Shatter and Greater Fireball bug as one of the main underlying sources of damage. Moving on to 6th place then is Death Trap Rogue, and if you are noticing a pattern here, it's there for a reason. Ultimate skills are at the core of nearly every one of the most powerful builds this season. The developers made a point of buffing ultimate skills, changing how they work a bit, adding new legendary aspects specifically for ultimate skills, and then some of the witchcraft powers and occult gems specifically are also built to work with ultimate skills. And the result is that any ultimate skill that you can properly build around can achieve some very impressive and powerful stuff. Death Trap Rogue has completed a tier 131 pit, which is extremely impressive for sure, and the main core of this is the ultimate skill itself for the damage, combined with the preparation specialization for Rogue to reduce the cooldown massively when spending energy, a ton of cooldown reduction in general to work in tandem with that, and then the Beastfall Boots unique that makes your next core skill after using an ultimate skill spend all of your energy, and this in total can result in near infinite death traps back to back. You can make death traps rearm themselves, they pull enemies multiple times as well, and then you can even add the core skill tag to them, which then lets you use the Banished Lord's Talisman for guaranteed overpowers on every death trap as well. In 5th then, we have Rogue again, nice to see you here, this time with the Rain of Arrows ultimate skill build. This is a few tiers higher, having completed a tier 136 at its peak, which has gone up a tier over the last variation of the build that I've seen too, due to essentially just ridiculous APM and skill management by the player here behind the build, who uses Heartseeker to build precision stacks for Rain of Arrows itself to proc, using the Heartseeker enhancement that makes enemies take bonus crit damage from you as well, and then using Twisting Blades as a way to trigger Beastfall Boots and spend all of your energy as a core skill, funneling through the preparation specialization to reset the cooldown on Rain of Arrows. Then this further combines with the Word of Hakan unique amulet, applying all imbuements to Rain of Arrows when you cast it and making it benefit from Arrow Storm damage bonuses too, as well specifically hitting Concealment right before any Rain of Arrows cast for a damage bump from the Shroud of False Death mythic unique chest piece, giving bonus damage on next attack after you enter stealth. And the specific order that you press all of these buttons in is very particular, and you basically have to spam them to be effective too, and if you mess it up, it can be very problematic for the overall damage per second of the build. So this is essentially just balancing a bunch of spinning plates and doing it extremely well for something that looks absolutely awesome when it all comes together. Then onto 4th place, we are into the realm of hitting just the top builds for various classes at this point, and this is going to be Inferno, Greater Fireball, Shatter, Sorcerer build, with a tier 142 pit completion as of this point. This focuses heavily on using Inferno with basically no cooldown to build up loads and loads of burning damage on enemies. You then combine that with Greater Fireball, which makes fireballs apply 10% of recent burning damage done to enemies as direct damage, Firebolt Enchantment, which fires off firebolts just as a random chance when you're attacking things, and applying burning damage increases against various enemies as a result, and then Shatter exploding when enemies unfreeze for a portion of the damage that was done to them while frozen, which has some very funky interactions with Greater Fireball itself. But then this is amplified even further through witch powers like Decay Augmentation, as you use the Voice of the Stars occult gem to make Inferno count as a witch power, which then lets you use Decay to make Inferno also apply a bonus up to 50% of its damage as extra burning damage over time on top of what it was already doing, enabling the synergy of the base build to get even stronger as a result. Though it's always worth mentioning, because this relies on Shatter for its damage, any bosses without ads basically just completely destroy your run. And so getting this to tier 142 in the pit is like a perfect stars aligning moment of doing pits for hours and hours and hours endlessly until the player got the perfect rolls to happen. Next then, in 3rd place, the bronze medalist is the Earthquake Barbarian build. Barb only gets one entry up on this list as of this point in Season 7, which is pretty surprising considering how previous seasons have gone. But if you can only have one entry, having it in 3rd place isn't bad at all, and Earthquake builds have been growing in power over and over, in fact even being buffed a bit by happenstance in the recent client patch and some stuff before that too. They fixed a number of the underlying bugs with Earthquakes, with some players reporting around a 20 to 30% damage increase on average this week, which is pretty fun to see happening. That said, this is our first build on the list with a tier 150 completion, doing it in 12 minutes and 28 seconds. The thing is, Earthquake builds were expected to be a really big deal this season due to the new Mantle of Mountain's Fury unique chest piece, augmenting how earthquakes work at their core, but instead at a really high level it's just basic normal earthquakes combined with the Shroud of False Death mythic unique, as this item is bugged and is somehow increasing the potency of the Unconstrained key passive. Normally this key passive increases the berserking bonus damage up to 60%, but for whatever reason with the Shroud of False Death equipped, it bumps it up to 95%, so it's a 35% multiplicative damage bonus from this bug. But then combine that with the Wrath of the Berserker ultimate skill, doubling your potential damage while berserking, and having that skill at 100% uptime, which you can easily do, and you just essentially have an extra 70% more multiplicative damage from that singular bugged interaction with the chess piece, not counting that the Shroud of False Death also provides a ton of offensive and defensive value in general, with just the bonus ranks to every passive on the tree anyways. After that, in second place, the silver medalist is Cataclysm Druid. With an 8 minute and 31 second tier 150 pit clear, this has a lot of similar concepts working under it to the Lacerate build that we talked about earlier, except that Cataclysm is just far easier to build around, as you can make it double dip in scaling with lightning bolt damage, which you can then make scale off of your willpower, which lets you stack loads of willpower for loads of Cataclysm damage as a result. You snapshot both guaranteed crit and overpower when you use Cataclysm, and then there are other active buffs that you can manage while the duration of Cataclysm is ongoing to actively increase your damage too. Shifting forms to increase your damage from something like Quick Shift, and that said, this build has some hefty gear requirements really to enter to begin with, but once you have it up and running, even outside of pits, this is just the simplest thing ever. It's an incredible power fantasy. You press a few buttons here or there, and then you'll start screen wiping everything around you for over 20 seconds per cast. Maybe it's not the most engaging gameplay loop for a lot of the stuff that it just overpowers, but if you are looking for power, if you're looking for power fantasy, this is absolutely top tier. Then finally, in first place, you all knew it was coming, it's the Shadow Damage Bloodwave Necromancer build with nearly half of the timer of the Druid build. This thing is absolutely menacing to watch do its thing. This is expected to be at the top of the rankings before the season released, and it has performed exactly as people thought it would. Pretty much the instant you get the Keseme's Legacy unique pants, which functionally adjust how Bloodwave works, and then you need the fast blood aspect as well with a decent roll for cooldown reductions on Bloodwave, but from there, even with the most cobbled together other set of gear you can get, you can clear higher tier pits than half of the builds on this list do in perfect equipment. Once you start getting guaranteed crit over powers and the ultimate shadow aspect to make Bloodwave apply shadow damage over time on the ground as it travels, then you can pair that with the Voice of the Stars legendary occult gem to make Bloodwave count as a witchcraft power and further synergize with all of those witchcraft powers too, and it just becomes a beautiful symphony of death dealing that is likely to see some adjustments in the future, sure, but we've been told that there are no nerfs expected for this for the rest of the season, so enjoy it while it's here. That just about does it for today, and everyone, the top 10 builds as of this point in Season 7 for Diablo 4, rated by their top reported pit clear. Obviously, not all of these are super comfortable to use outside of pits because they are designed for pits as a main purpose, but anything that can reach the pure damage requirements to make it on this list is more than strong enough to consider using if you want to just try out more builds for your class. I hope you've all enjoyed this and feel free to leave any comments down below. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.